My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm 29 years old. What happened at my sister's wedding 3 months ago is still the talk of our entire county. Picture this: 250 guests packed into the Crystal Ballroom at the Marriott. My sister Jessica pointing and laughing at my husband's muddy work boots, calling him a dirt-poor farmer right into the microphone during her maid of honor speech. The room erupted in laughter as she suggested I upgrade to someone more financially stable, like her new husband, a bank manager. But here's what nobody expected. When my husband Jake quietly stood up and walked to his truck, returning with a manila folder, my sister's laughter died in her throat. Inside that folder were our tax returns for the past 3 years, the same tax returns that showed our organic farming operation had generated over $2.8 million in revenue last year alone. The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Before we dive into this story, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy stories about never judging a book by its cover. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below and let me know if you've ever been underestimated because of how you look or what you do for a living. Let me take you back to that morning when I thought I was just attending my older sister's dream wedding. I arrived at the hotel at 9 a.m., 2 hours before the ceremony. The Crystal Ballroom looked absolutely stunning. White peonies and silver accents everywhere. Exactly what Jessica had been planning since we were teenagers. I'd contributed $15,000 to help make this day perfect for her, though she'd never acknowledged that publicly. "Sarah, finally," Jessica said, looking me up and down with that familiar disapproving expression. "That dress. Couldn't you have chosen something more expensive looking? You look like you shopped at Target." I smoothed down my navy blue dress. Actually a $400 piece I'd bought specifically for this occasion. "Good morning, Jess. You look absolutely beautiful." "Well, at least one of us does," she continued, not even acknowledging my compliment. "Where's your farmer boy? Don't tell me he's coming here in those disgusting work clothes." Jake had stopped by our farm that morning to check on our prized Holstein cattle before coming to the wedding. Our organic dairy operation required constant attention, especially during calving season. But Jessica had never understood that successful farming meant early mornings and getting your hands dirty. "Jake will be here in his suit, just like we discussed," I said, keeping my voice level. "His suit?" Jessica snorted. "What, the one from JCPenney? Sarah, honestly, when are you going to realize you married beneath yourself? You had a college degree. You could have done so much better." The criticism wasn't new. For 3 years since Jake and I got married, my family had treated him like he was some kind of charity case I'd taken pity on. They saw the dirt under his fingernails and the calluses on his hands and assumed he was poor. They never bothered to learn about his agricultural science degree from UC Davis, his innovative, sustainable farming methods, or the fact that he'd transformed his family's struggling 200-acre farm into one of the most profitable organic operations in the state. "Sarah, can you help with the centerpieces?" my mother called out. "But don't rearrange everything like you always do." Jessica has very specific ideas about how things should look. I bit my tongue. The centerpieces were clearly unbalanced, with some tables having elaborate arrangements while others looked sparse. But pointing that out would just make me the difficult daughter again. What they didn't know, what I'd never told them, was that Jake and I weren't just making ends meet on our farm. We were thriving. Our organic milk commanded premium prices from high-end restaurants and boutique grocery stores across California. Our grass-fed beef operation had a 6-month waiting list. We'd just signed a contract with Whole Foods that would nearly double our revenue next year. But in this family, success was measured by office buildings and business suits, not soil quality and sustainable practices. Jake's mud-stained boots were seen as a sign of failure, not evidence of honest work that was making us financially independent at 29. Where is Jake anyway? My cousin Madison asked, appearing beside me as I adjusted a crooked flower arrangement. I haven't seen him yet. He'll be here soon. He had to check on some cattle this morning. Madison laughed. Still playing farmer, huh? When is he going to get a real job? I wanted to tell her about the $150,000 in profit we'd made just last quarter. I wanted to mention that we owned our 400-acre property outright, with no mortgage. I wanted to explain that Jake's playing farmer was more profitable than most corporate jobs. But what was the point? They'd made up their minds about us years ago. Farming is a real job, Madison. It feeds people. Sure, she said dismissively. But Sarah, you're smart. You could have married a doctor, a lawyer, someone who could give you a nice life in the city. Instead, you're stuck on that farm, probably struggling to pay bills. If she only knew. Jake and I had just finished building our dream home, a 4,000-square-foot custom house with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking our property. We'd paid cash. The architects had featured it in Rural Living magazine as an example of modern sustainable design. But my family had never visited, so they'd never seen it. Around us, relatives whispered their usual assessments. Poor Sarah, she could have done so much better. That husband of hers, what does he even make as a farmer? At least Jessica found someone with a stable career. My Uncle Robert smirked from across the room. Hey, Sarah, how's the farming business? Jake making enough to keep you two afloat? The laughter rippled through our relatives. I wanted to tell them about our diversified revenue streams, the dairy operation, the grass-fed cattle, the organic vegetable CSA program, the agritourism business we'd started last year. I wanted to mention that we employed 12 full-time workers and had become one of the largest employers in our rural county. We're doing just fine, Uncle Robert, I said quietly. That's good, he said with that patronizing tone people use when they think you're lying. Farming's tough these days. Hope you two have a backup plan. I straightened another centerpiece, my hands steady despite the familiar sting of their dismissal. They had no idea who we really were, and maybe that was for the best. Let them underestimate us. We'd built something extraordinary while they were busy judging our dirty boots. Jessica floated over in her wedding dress, looking like the princess she'd always believed she was. Sarah, have you met Michael's parents yet? His father is the regional manager for Wells Fargo. Very successful, very established. Michael makes 6 figures as a bank manager. That's wonderful, Jessica. I'm happy for you. You should be taking notes, she said with a laugh that had an edge to it. This is what a successful wedding looks like. This is what happens when you marry someone with ambition, someone with a real career. I could have mentioned that Jake and I had cleared more in the past year than Michael would make in 5 years at the bank. I could have told her about the consulting contracts we'd signed with other farms wanting to transition to organic methods. I could have shown her the photos on my phone of our new John Deere equipment, $300,000 worth of state-of-the-art machinery we'd purchased outright last month. But what would that prove? That I needed their validation? You're right, Jessica, I said instead. Success looks different for everyone. She missed the irony completely. Exactly. And now maybe you'll understand why we've all been so worried about your situation. My situation. As if being married to one of the most innovative farmers in California was some kind of tragedy. Jake arrived just as the ceremony was about to begin, looking handsome in his charcoal gray suit. His hands were clean, his hair was styled, but I could still see the faint tan lines from his work gloves and the small scar on his thumb from repairing fence wire last week. These weren't signs of poverty. They were badges of honor from a man who worked with his hands to build something meaningful. Sorry I'm late, he whispered, sliding into the pew beside me. Had to help with a difficult calving. Saved both mama and baby, though. How much did that cost you in vet bills? my Aunt Patricia whispered loudly enough for others to hear. I hope you have insurance for that kind of thing. Jake just smiled politely. He'd learned long ago that trying to explain our business to my family was pointless. They'd never understand that saving a prize Holstein and her calf had just preserved about $4,000 worth of genetics for our breeding program. The ceremony was beautiful. Jessica looked radiant. Michael seemed genuinely kind, and for a moment, I forgot about all the family drama. This was about love and commitment, something Jake and I understood deeply. We'd built our life together from the ground up, literally and figuratively. But then came the reception. The trouble started during cocktail hour. Michael's parents were holding court near the bar, talking about their son's promotion and their recent vacation to Europe. My parents gravitated toward them like moths to a flame, clearly impressed by their obvious wealth and sophistication. "Sarah, come meet the Andersons," my mother called out. "Michael's parents." "They're from San Francisco." I walked over with Jake, who looked perfectly comfortable despite being surrounded by people in expensive suits and designer dresses. "This is my younger daughter Sarah and her husband Jake," Mom said. "Jake is a farmer." The pause before farmer said everything, like she was introducing someone with an embarrassing medical condition. "How nice," Mrs. Anderson said politely. "What kind of farming do you do?" "We run an organic dairy and beef operation," Jake explained. "About 400 acres north of here. We also do some direct-to-consumer sales and agritourism." "That sounds quaint," Mr. Anderson said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Must be hard to make ends meet in agriculture these days." "We do all right," Jake said simply. "I'm sure you work very hard," Mrs. Anderson added in that tone people use when they're being polite about something they consider beneath them. My father jumped in, clearly embarrassed. "Jake's a good boy, very hardworking. Sarah could have. Well, we always thought she might end up with someone in business or law, you know. But love is love, right?" The humiliation burned in my chest. Here was my father, essentially apologizing for my husband to people who didn't know us at all. Jake's face remained neutral, but I could see the slight tightening around his eyes. What my father didn't know was that Jake had been offered a position at Monsanto right out of college with a starting salary of $85,000. He'd turned it down to come home and save his family's farm, transforming it from a struggling conventional operation into an organic showcase that now hosted visitors from around the world. "Well," Mrs. Anderson said, "at least he's employed. So many young people these days don't want to work." If only she knew. Jake was up every morning at 4:30 a.m., checking on animals, monitoring soil conditions, managing crop rotations. He worked harder than anyone I knew, including Michael with his 9-to-5 bank job and 2-hour lunch breaks. The conversation mercifully ended when Jessica called everyone to take their seats for dinner, but I could see the wheels turning in my parents' minds. They were comparing Jake to Michael, measuring success by suits and job titles instead of work ethic and actual achievement. Dinner was a formal affair with multiple courses and wine pairings that probably cost more than most people spend on food in a month. Jessica had spared no expense, and it showed. The ice sculpture alone probably cost $2,000. "This must be overwhelming for you too," my cousin Derek said from across the table. "I mean, coming from your lifestyle to something like this." "It's a beautiful wedding," I replied carefully. "Jessica really went all out," Derek continued. "Of course, Michael can afford it. Banking pays well. Not like other jobs." Jake cut his steak calmly, not rising to the bait, but I could see our table mates exchanging glances, clearly enjoying the subtle put-downs. They saw Jake as the poor relation who'd somehow tricked their way into the family. What they couldn't see was the Rolex on Jake's wrist. Not flashy, but worth more than most of their cars. It had been a gift to himself after our first $1 million year. What they didn't know was that we'd paid for our own wedding in cash, while Jessica and Michael were still paying off credit card debt from tonight's festivities. At least farming is honest work, someone said, like they were throwing us a bone. Very honest, Jake agreed with a smile that I recognized. It was the same smile he wore when city inspectors came to our farm, expecting to find violations, and instead found operation that exceeded every safety and quality standard. The band struck up after dinner, and couples began moving to the dance floor. Jake and I danced to a few songs, trying to enjoy the evening despite the constant undercurrent of condescension from my family. "You okay?" Jake whispered as we swayed to a slow song. "I'm sorry about all this," I said. "They don't understand what we've built." "Their loss," he said simply. "I know who I am. You know who I am. That's all that matters." But I could see it wearing on him. 3 years of family gatherings where he was treated like Jessica's charity case had taken their toll. Jake was proud of his work, proud of what we'd accomplished, but constantly being dismissed and patronized was exhausting for anyone. That's when Jessica took the microphone for her maid of honor speech. If you've ever been in a situation where someone you love was publicly humiliated, you know that sinking feeling in your stomach. Type "been there" in the comments below. What happened next was going to change everything, but not in the way Jessica expected. Jessica tapped her champagne glass with a knife, the crystal ringing clearly through the ballroom sound system. The band stopped playing, conversations died down, and all 250 guests turned their attention to her. "Good evening, everyone," she began, radiant in her white gown, holding the microphone like she'd been born to it. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate the most important day of my life." Applause rippled through the crowd. I smiled and clapped along, genuinely happy for my sister despite everything. "I want to thank my wonderful husband Michael," she continued, beaming at him. "A man who knows how to provide, who has a real career, who can give me the life I've always dreamed of." The emphasis on real career wasn't lost on anyone at our table. I felt Jake's hand tighten slightly on mine. "When I look around this room," Jessica continued, "I see so many successful couples, people who've built lives together based on ambition, stability, and shared goals." She was building up to something. I could feel it. "Now, I know some people make different choices," Jessica said, her eyes finding mine across the room. "Some people prioritize other things. Love is important, of course, but so is being practical about your future." My stomach started to churn. She wouldn't. Not here, not in front of everyone. "Take my sister Sarah, for example," Jessica said, and my worst fears were confirmed. "She chose love over logic. She married a farmer." Laughter began to ripple through the crowd. Not mean-spirited yet, but amused. "Now, there's nothing wrong with farming," Jessica continued with that patronizing tone I knew so well. "It's honest work, as they say, but let's be realistic about what that means for their future." The laughter was growing now. I could see people at other tables turning to look at us, some pointing discreetly. "I mean, look at them," Jessica said, gesturing toward our table. "My sister, who has a college degree, could have married a doctor, a lawyer, anyone, but she chose someone who, well, let's just say his idea of dressing up is clean boots." Now people were openly laughing. I felt my face burning with embarrassment, but not for myself. For Jake. He sat perfectly still, his expression neutral, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. "And the financial prospects?" Jessica continued, warming to her theme. "I hate to be blunt, but farming doesn't exactly scream security, does it? I mean, when was the last time you heard of a wealthy farmer?" The laughter was louder now. Someone at the back actually whooped. I looked around the room and saw nothing but amused faces, people enjoying the roast of the poor farmer and his deluded wife. "I just hope," Jessica said, her voice dripping with false concern, that Sarah has a backup plan. Because when reality hits, when the bills start piling up, when she realizes what she gave up, well, let's just say I'll always be here for her. The crowd erupted in applause and laughter. Jessica curtsied dramatically, clearly pleased with her performance. Michael looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything. My parents were smiling and nodding along with everyone else. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to grab Jake and run out of there. But Jake was already standing up, his movements calm and deliberate. "Excuse me," he said quietly to our table, his voice carrying despite the noise. He walked purposefully toward the exit, and I saw heads turning to follow his movement. "Where's he going?" Someone whispered loudly enough for half the room to hear. "Can't handle the truth?" More laughter followed Jake as he left the ballroom. Jessica was still holding the microphone, looking pleased with herself. "Don't worry," she announced to the crowd. "He'll be back." Where else is he going to go? It's not like he can afford to stay anywhere else. The laughter reached a crescendo. I sat frozen in my chair, tears of rage and humiliation burning behind my eyes. 3 years of subtle put-downs and patronizing comments had just exploded into public mockery, and my entire family was eating it up. But then Jake walked back through the ballroom doors. He was carrying a manila folder in one hand and his phone in the other. His expression was calm, almost serene. He walked directly to Jessica, who was still standing at the head table with the microphone. "Excuse me," he said politely. "Could I borrow that for a moment?" Jessica looked confused but handed over the microphone, probably thinking he was going to apologize or make some self-deprecating joke to play along with her narrative. Jake looked out at the crowd of 250 people, all watching him with amused anticipation. The room had gone quiet except for a few scattered chuckles. "Hi, everyone," Jake said, his voice clear and confident through the sound system. "I'm Jake Mitchell, Sarah's husband." The farmer. A few people snickered, but something in Jake's tone made most of the room go silent. "Jessica's right about a few things," Jake continued. "I do work with my hands. I do get dirty. My boots are often muddy. And yes, my idea of formal wear is clean jeans and a button-down shirt." He opened the manila folder he'd been carrying. "But there's something Jessica forgot to mention in her speech," Jake said, his voice still calm but now carrying an edge. "She forgot to do her research." He pulled out several sheets of paper and held them up for everyone to see. "These are our tax returns for the past 3 years," Jake announced. "I thought you might be interested in the financial prospects Jessica was so concerned about." The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. "Last year," Jake said, reading from the documents, "our organic farming operation generated $2.8 million in gross revenue. After expenses, our net profit was $1.2 million. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. I saw Jessica's face go white. "The year before that," Jake continued, "we cleared $950,000. Our first year in business, we made $780,000. He looked directly at Jessica, who was standing frozen beside him. "For comparison," Jake said, "I believe Michael makes about $75,000 a year at the bank. Correct me if I'm wrong." Michael's face had turned bright red. The room was so quiet I could hear people breathing. "So when Jessica talks about financial security and backup plans," Jake continued, "I think she might have her facts a little mixed up." He pulled out his phone and showed it to the crowd. "This is a photo of our home," he said. 4,000 square feet, custom built, paid for in cash, featured in Rural Living magazine last month as an example of sustainable luxury design." He swiped to the next photo. "This is our equipment barn. That's about $800,000 worth of John Deere machinery, also paid for in cash." Another swipe. "This is our herd of prize Holstein cattle. Each of these animals is worth between $2,000 and $4,000. We have 200 head." The math was hitting people. I could see faces in the crowd changing from amusement to shock to embarrassment. "And this," Jake said, showing one final photo, "is the contract we signed with Whole Foods last month. It's a 3-year exclusive deal worth $4.2 million total." Jessica grabbed for the microphone, but Jake wasn't done. "Now, I'm not sharing this to embarrass anyone," he said, though that's exactly what was happening. "I'm sharing it because I think it's important for people to understand something about success." He looked out at the crowd, making eye contact with various family members who had spent years dismissing him. "Success isn't measured by your zip code or your job title," Jake said. "It's not about wearing a suit to work or having an office in a high-rise building." His voice grew stronger, more confident. "Success is about creating value, solving problems, and building something meaningful. Our farm feeds families across California with clean, healthy food. We employ 12 people full-time with benefits and profit sharing. We've restored 400 acres of land to sustainable production." Jake paused, letting that sink in. "We've built a business that will still be here in 50 years, contributing to our community and taking care of the land for future generations. That might not look impressive to people who only see muddy boots, but I'm proud of what we've accomplished." He handed the microphone back to Jessica, who looked like she wanted to disappear through the floor. "Congratulations on your wedding, Jessica," Jake said sincerely. "I wish you and Michael nothing but happiness." Then he walked calmly back to our table, sat down, and took a sip of his water like he'd just commented on the weather. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Finally, someone started clapping slowly. Then someone else joined in. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was applauding, not the mocking laughter from before, but genuine, impressed applause. Jessica stood at the head table, still holding the microphone, looking like a deer caught in headlights. Michael had his head in his hands. My parents looked stunned. But the most satisfying moment was watching my Uncle Robert, the one who'd made the comment about backup plans, pull out his phone and frantically Google something. Probably organic farming profits or sustainable agriculture revenue. His face went pale as he realized just how wrong he'd been. Jake's calm demolition of their assumptions wasn't just about money, though the financial numbers were certainly shocking to people who thought farmers were barely scraping by. It was about respect, recognition, and the value of honest work. For 3 years, my family had treated Jake like a charity case I'd foolishly taken on. They'd measured his worth by their own narrow definition of success, never bothering to learn about what he actually did or how well he did it. The applause finally died down, and Jessica managed to stammer something about moving on to the cake cutting. But the damage was done. The narrative had completely flipped. Suddenly, Jake wasn't the poor farmer who'd trapped their daughter. He was the successful entrepreneur who'd somehow ended up with family who couldn't see past their own prejudices. People started approaching our table, wanting to know more about the farm, asking about tours, inquiring about our products. Business cards were exchanged. A reporter from the local agricultural magazine asked for an interview. But the best part was watching my family's faces as the reality sank in. All those years of condescension, all those patronizing comments, all those assumptions about our struggling lifestyle, completely upended by a few sheets of paper and some photos on a phone. "Jake," my father approached tentatively after the cake was cut. Could we talk?" "Of course, Mr. Thompson," Jake replied politely, though I noticed he didn't call him Dad like he used to. I think we may have misunderstood your situation," Dad said, his face red with embarrassment. "No misunderstanding," Jake said calmly. "You understood exactly what you wanted to understand. You saw muddy boots and assumed failure. You saw calloused hands and assumed poverty. You saw a farmer and decided that meant inferior." Dad opened his mouth to protest, but Jake continued. The thing is, I never needed your approval or validation. Sarah and I built something together because we love the work and we're good at it. Your opinion of our success doesn't change our success. It was a masterclass in dignity. Jake wasn't cruel or petty in his victory. He was simply stating facts, letting my father sit with the consequences of his own prejudice. My mother appeared next, looking mortified. "Jake, I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "We've been unfair." "You've been honest about your values," Jake replied. "You value appearance over substance, status over character. That's your choice." "But we didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't ask," Jake interrupted gently. "In 3 years of family gatherings, not one of you asked me about my education, my business plan, my goals, or my achievements. You made assumptions and stuck with them." Jake stood up and offered me his hand. "Sarah, are you ready to go home?" he asked. I took his hand gratefully. "More than ready." As we walked through the ballroom toward the exit, conversations stopped and heads turned. People who'd been laughing at us an hour ago were now looking at us with respect, curiosity, and no small amount of envy. Jessica caught up with us near the door. "Sarah, wait," she said, her voice shaky. I didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't want to know, Jess," I said sadly. "You had your story about the poor farmer and his deluded wife, and you stuck with it regardless of reality." "But I was just joking, having fun." "You were bullying," I corrected. "You were publicly humiliating your sister and her husband for the entertainment of 250 people. There's a difference." Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of embarrassment at being exposed. "Everyone's going to remember this forever," she whispered. "Yes," I agreed. "They are. But maybe next time you'll think before you assume someone's worth based on their job title or their clothes." We left Jessica standing there in her designer wedding dress, probably calculating how much money she'd just insulted and how many bridges she'd just burned. The drive home to our farm was quiet but peaceful. Jake held my hand as we wound through the country roads, past fields and pastures lit by moonlight. "I'm sorry it took so long for me to stand up to them," I said finally. "You were protecting the peace," Jake replied. "I understand that. But sometimes people need to hear the truth, especially when they're so confident in their ignorance." "The look on Jessica's face when you read those numbers?" Jake chuckled. "I particularly enjoyed your Uncle Robert Googling sustainable agriculture profits right there at his table. Pretty sure he just realized his investment portfolio doesn't look quite as impressive anymore." We pulled into our driveway and I looked at our beautiful home with fresh eyes, the house we'd designed and built with money we'd earned through hard work and innovation. The life we'd created together despite constant criticism from people who should have been cheering us on. "Have I mentioned lately that I love you?" I asked as we walked up to our front door. "Only every day," Jake replied, kissing me softly. "But I never get tired of hearing it." The next few days brought an avalanche of consequences that rippled far beyond the wedding reception. Jake's impromptu presentation had been filmed by multiple guests and shared across social media platforms. Within 48 hours, the video had gone viral with hashtags like #NeverJudgeAFarmer and #RuralSuccess. Local news stations picked up the story, framing it as a David and Goliath tale of humble farmers versus urban prejudice. Agricultural magazines requested interviews. The County Agricultural Extension Office asked Jake to speak at their annual conference about innovative farming techniques. But the most interesting calls came from other farmers who'd seen the video and wanted to know more about our organic transition methods. Jake found himself consulting with operations across 3 states, helping them develop sustainable practices that could increase both their environmental impact and their profitability. Looks like you accidentally started a movement, I told him as he finished another consultation call. People are hungry for alternatives, he said. They're tired of the myth that farming can't be profitable without destroying the environment. When they see our numbers, they realize there's a better way. Jessica called 3 days after the wedding, but I let it go to voicemail. Her message was rambling and defensive, something about how she was just trying to be funny and how we should have told her about our success if we wanted her to know about it. I didn't call her back. The burden wasn't on us to prove our worth to people who had already made up their minds. My parents, however, were more persistent. Dad showed up at our farm on Thursday morning, looking uncomfortable and out of place in his business suit among our fields and barns. This is bigger than I expected, he admitted, looking around at our operation. Most things are, when you actually look at them, Jake replied. Not unkindly, but not particularly warmly either. Dad wanted a tour, wanted to understand what we'd built. Jake obliged, explaining our rotational grazing system, our organic certification process, our direct marketing strategies. Dad asked good questions, and I could see him recalculating everything he thought he knew about modern agriculture. The profit margins on organic milk are really that much higher? Dad asked as we watched our cattle grazing in lush pastures. When you cut out the middleman and sell directly to restaurants and specialty stores, absolutely, Jake explained. Plus, our costs are lower because we don't buy chemical fertilizers or pesticides. The land does most of the work if you manage it right. Dad nodded thoughtfully. I owe you both an apology. A big one. You owe us respect, I corrected. The same respect you'd give any successful business owner. You're right, Dad said quietly. I've been an ass. I let my prejudices about farming cloud my judgment about you both. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was a start. Dad began visiting regularly, genuinely interested in learning about our operation. He even invested $50,000 in our expansion plans, becoming our first outside investor. Mom took longer to come around. Her apology, when it finally came, was more about saving face than genuine remorse. She'd been embarrassed by the viral video and the questions from her friends about why she hadn't supported her daughter's success. But the most dramatic consequence came 2 weeks after the wedding, when Michael showed up at our farm alone. I need to talk to you both, he said, looking haggard and exhausted. We invited him in, curious about what could bring Jessica's new husband to our door. Jessica's been different since the wedding, Michael began. She's obsessed with what happened, with the video, with what people are saying. He ran his hands through his hair. But more than that, she's angry. Really angry. Not embarrassed, not apologetic. Angry that you made her look bad. Jake and I exchanged glances. This wasn't entirely surprising, but it was disappointing. She's been researching ways to discredit your numbers, Michael continued, talking about hiring someone to audit your taxes, calling the Organic Certification Board to report you for false advertising, even contacting the health department about your facilities. Jesus, I breathed. Michael, I'm sorry. This is insane, Michael finished. It's insane. And it's made me realize some things about the woman I married. He looked around our kitchen. Spacious, modern, clearly expensive. I thought I was the successful one, he admitted. I thought I was rescuing Jessica from a family where her sister had made poor choices. But seeing this place, understanding what you've built, I've been living in a fantasy. Michael's confession continued for another hour. Jessica had been pressuring him to demand a raise at the bank, to look for a higher-paying job, to somehow compete with the numbers Jake had presented. She couldn't accept that her narrative about success had been so thoroughly demolished. The marriage isn't going to work, Michael said finally. I can see that now. Jessica can't handle being wrong, and she definitely can't handle someone else being more successful than she expected. They separated 6 weeks after the wedding. Jessica blamed Jake and me for poisoning Michael against her. But the truth was simpler. Michael had seen her true character under pressure, and he didn't like what he found. The divorce was finalized within 6 months, with Jessica receiving a modest settlement that she immediately spent on a luxury apartment in the city, apparently trying to prove she didn't need Michael's income to live well. The apartment ate through her settlement money in less than a year. Meanwhile, our farm continued to thrive. The viral video had brought us so much positive attention that we launched an agritourism program, hosting farm-to-table dinners and educational tours. City families paid premium prices to bring their children out to see where their food came from. We hired a marketing manager to handle the increased demand for our products. We expanded our vegetable operation to include a CSA program that sold out within hours of opening registration. We even started a small wedding venue business, hosting ceremonies in our restored 1920s barn. By the end of the year, our revenue had increased by 40%, and we were featured on the cover of Progressive Farmer magazine as an example of successful agricultural entrepreneurship. You know what? The best part is? Jake said one evening as we sat on our porch, watching the sunset over our fields. What's that? We didn't have to change anything about who we are or what we do. We just had to stop letting other people define our worth. He was right. The farm was the same. Our work was the same. Our values were the same. The only thing that changed was other people's perception, and honestly, that was the least important part. Jessica made one more attempt at reconciliation the following Christmas, showing up at our parents' house during our annual family gathering. She'd clearly expected me to welcome her with open arms, to pretend the wedding incident had never happened. "I've learned so much this year," she said, cornering me in the kitchen while I helped with dinner preparations. "About success, about what really matters." "Have you?" I asked, continuing to slice vegetables for the salad. I realize now that I was wrong to judge Jake's profession. Farming is clearly more profitable than I understood. I stopped slicing and looked at her directly. "That's not an apology, Jessica. That's just you admitting you were wrong about the money. What about the public humiliation? What about treating my husband like a charity case for 3 years? What about mocking our lifestyle and our choices?" Jessica looked confused, like she genuinely didn't understand the difference. But I just said I was wrong about farming being unprofitable. "You were wrong about a lot more than that," I said firmly. "You were wrong to assume that your definition of success was the only valid one. You were wrong to mock someone for honest work. You were wrong to think that wearing a suit to an office made you superior to someone who works with their hands. But, and most importantly," I continued, "you were wrong to think that family members should humiliate each other for entertainment. That's not what love looks like, Jessica." She left early that evening, and I haven't seen her since. According to Mom, Jessica moved to Los Angeles, claiming she needed a fresh start, away from people who couldn't appreciate her humor. But the story doesn't end with family drama. It ends with success, growth, and the satisfaction of building something meaningful despite the doubters. 3 years later, our farm has become a model operation that hosts visitors from agricultural colleges across the country. Jake was invited to speak at the National Sustainable Agriculture Conference, and his presentation on profitability through regenerative practices was standing room only. We've opened a farm store that sells our products directly to consumers, along with goods from other local producers. We employ 22 people full-time, making us one of the largest private employers in our county. We've helped 12 other farms transition to organic methods, creating a network of sustainable producers throughout the region. Our personal income has grown to the point where money is no longer a concern. We reinvest most of our profits back into the land, the business, and the community. We established a scholarship fund for agricultural students at the local community college. We donated land for a community garden that provides fresh vegetables to the food bank. But perhaps most importantly, we've never forgotten the lesson from that wedding reception. Never let other people's limited understanding define your worth. The video of Jake's response still circulates occasionally, shared by people who relate to being underestimated or dismissed because of their appearance, their profession, or their choices. We get messages from farmers, teachers, mechanics, artists, and others who've dealt with family members or social circles that didn't respect their paths. "Thank you for showing that success comes in many forms," wrote one viewer. "My family finally stopped asking when I was going to get a real job after they saw your husband's presentation." Another message came from a young woman whose family had criticized her decision to become a veterinarian. "I showed them your video when they said I was wasting my education on animal work. Now they brag about having a doctor in the family." The ripple effects continue to surprise us. Jake was recently appointed to the State Agricultural Advisory Board, helping shape policy around sustainable farming practices. I was elected to the school board, where I advocate for agricultural education programs that teach children about food systems and environmental stewardship. Our marriage has only grown stronger through all of this. Facing down the doubters together, building something beautiful despite the criticism, proving that love and respect matter more than other people's opinions, these experiences have created an unshakable foundation. Every morning, I wake up in the house we built with money we earned through work we love, surrounded by land we've restored and protected. I watch Jake head out to check on animals he knows by name, managing systems he's spent years perfecting. This is success on our own terms, measured by our own values. The muddy boots are still there. The calloused hands haven't disappeared. Jake still comes home tired and dirty from honest work. But now I see these things for what they really are: evidence of a life well lived, of problems solved and value created, of a man who chose substance over appearance every single day. And Jessica? Last I heard, she was working as a social media manager for a startup in Los Angeles, still looking for her big break, still measuring success by other people's standards instead of building something of her own. But that's her story to write. This one belongs to Jake and me, to the farm we've built, the family we've chosen, and the life we've created despite everyone who said it couldn't be done. So here's what I learned from that disaster of a wedding reception. Assumptions are dangerous, prejudice is expensive, and success is defined by the people living it, not by the people watching from the sidelines. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or mocked for your choices, remember this: their opinion of your path doesn't change where that path leads. Keep walking. Keep building. Keep proving them wrong, not with words, but with results. And if someone ever tries to publicly humiliate you for your honest work, just remember, tax returns don't lie, and sometimes the best response to mockery is simply showing up with facts. Where are you in your journey? Have you ever had to defend your choices to people who didn't understand them? Drop a comment below and let me know what success looks like in your life. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that their path is valid, even if others don't understand it. Subscribe for more stories about building lives on your own terms and never apologizing for honest success. Remember, never judge a book by its cover, never underestimate someone based on their appearance, and never assume that your definition of success is the only one that matters. Your worth isn't determined by their understanding. Keep growing, keep building, and keep proving that success comes in as many forms as there are people willing to work for it. Thank you for listening to our story. May your own path lead you exactly where you're meant to be, regardless of what anyone else thinks about the journey.